listening to Shop Talk with your host, Kevin Tetz. Brought to you by Eastwood Tools. Everything you need to do the job right.
Hey, Gearheads, you're listening to Shop Talk, brought to you by the Eastwood Company. Do the job right with Eastwood. I'm your host, Kevin Tetz, and today we have a great conversation with Fred Staab. Now, you may or may not know Fred's name, but I feel like you share his passion for all things automotive. And if you've ever listened to Cruise Control Radio on the weekends, well, then you certainly know him, and we get to talk about how he got started in radio, as well as his beginnings as a gearhead in Long Island, of all locations. Fred is a perfect example of it not really mattering where you're from, but there's always somebody that shares your passion for the automotive world. You are listening to Shop Talk, brought to you by the Eastwood Company, makers of fine automotive tools and equipment. Do the job right with Eastwood. Well, today we are talking to somebody that I count in the ranks of friends of mine, and also he's a really interesting cat in the sense that he lives in New York City. He's got his finger on the pulse of what's happening with new automotive technology. He gets to test all kinds of crazy new vehicles. He's got his own radio show called Cruise Control, and he's a gearhead. I've made fun of him a little bit and called him a fish out of water up there in Manhattan, but you know, we share a lot of similar philosophies and a lot of similar thoughts on the automotive industry. So we're going to be talking about some of that cool stuff today. This is Fred Staab. Fred, how are you?
I'm great, Kevin. Thanks for having me on here. I like your description of me.
Sorry to call you a fish, but it's, you know, I think it's a decent adjective. But you are a dyed-in-the-wool gearhead, man. You really are. You've got one of the heaviest right foots I've ever encountered, and you know, and we just have a lot in common. And I thought that, you know, for the listeners of Shop Talk, you'd be a great guy to talk to kind of lend your perspective on some of the stuff that's not only coming down the pike, but also maybe even some regulations we're having to deal with, and opinions of people that may not be quite on track with the actual reality when it comes to diesel technology and alternative fuels and things like that. So again, thanks for popping in and giving us your time.
Oh yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I love diesel technology. I'll just start with that one. I mean, I grew up around it. My dad worked for Detroit Diesel, and you know, I always just liked the idea of the diesel and the torque, and he even had, to tell you, this will give you a little idea about what kind of gearhead I am. It starts early, as you know. He had a little fun car. He says he's not a gearhead or a car guy, but I know he is. He had a 59 Plymouth Savoy that was a taxi cab in New York City, and Plymouth had done a deal with Perkins, and they put four-cylinder diesels in these taxi cabs with the idea that they would try them out and see how they worked out in fleet service. And he bought one of the retired ones and you know, repainted it himself, which I know is near and dear to your heart, and
absolutely
drove it around. I remember I was so short that it had no radio in it, like any taxi cab, but it had the hole for it, and I would, as we were driving along, this tells you how safety regulations have changed. As a little kid, I would look in that hole, and on a rainy day, I could see the wiper arms going back and forth, you know, that behind the dash.
Absolutely, yeah, I could see it in my mind, absolutely.
And check this out. So he had it for, I guess, about a year or whatever, and it was fun, and I enjoyed it. And then one day he said, well, I'm selling it. This guy showed up, and he said, I'm selling it to this guy. And I said, yeah, but we'll still keep it, right? And he goes, no, he's going to take it. And I burst out crying. I must have been like, you know, 4 or 5 years old. That's a gearhead, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're born with that. Well, I'm sorry it made you sad, but it kind of shows that your feet are firmly planted in all things automotive. So that's cool.
Plenty more cars after that. It was okay. I got over it right away.
Yeah. So where did you grow up, Fred?
Long Island, New York, and it was a suburb of New York City, about probably 25 miles out.
Yeah. It's sometimes pronounced Long Island.
Not by me, though.
No.
But yes, that's true. Some people will use that as their way of saying it. It was definitely a car place because, you know, the transit, you had the Long Island Railroad, but that would not take you near anything, any place you needed to go to, just get you to the city. So always had cars. And I used to go out. I think my first real gearhead racing experience was I went out to National Speedway out in Center Moriches, Long Island, and I would be the first guy up, young guy, and we would get there the first at the gate to get the seats, and went, so the nitro cars, or nitro funnies and dragsters, and I think the sound of that really drilled into me because I thought, this sounds like the most powerful thing I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, you feel it as much as hear it,
you
don't
feel
you?
the ground shake as they go by, and I thought, I want to do this,
Yeah.
I did go to the Frank Hawley drag racing school many years later in that, but I never drove a nitro car, but I think that something that really got to me. And I remember seeing a neighbor had a big block Corvette that was really beat up that he bought. And I thought that was kind of cool, but I thought, why didn't he fix it up? Because there was big chunks of fiberglass missing from it, even as a kid.
Yeah.
So I always enjoyed cars. I always enjoyed trucks, anything mechanical.
Well, it's always interesting to me to find people's history on how they were bitten by the bug and infected with automotive passion, if you will. How did you end up? How should I say this? How did you end up creating the Cruise Control Radio Show? And there's other things that you do, and we'll get to that. But how did Cruise Control Radio come up for you?
Well, it used to be. It was a guy named Bob Hall, and he worked out of Carlisle Productions, and they put on a bunch of shows. I know you've been involved with them and done some seminars there. Their big one is Corvettes at Carlisle, and I was writing for ABC, ABC.com, and basically because, ABCnews.com, I should say, basically because they wanted to start an automotive page. They assigned it to someone who was a typical New York City person who told me, I hate cars. I don't know why nobody would be interested in that, reviewing cars and talking about car technology. And I said, well, I like them. I'll do it. It was completely out of my job title. I was in a management job, and I said, well, you know what? I'll write reviews and that. And I started to get loans of cars and write about reviews and go to events. And one of the events I wrote about was Corvettes at Carlisle, and they invited me out, and I went out there, and I met this guy, Bob Hall, and he said, we do a radio show called All About Cars. You ought to come on as a guest. And I said, I haven't done radio since college days, when I was playing alternative 80s music and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined him on air, and, it was a good, Les Jackson was his co-host, and it was a good kind of camaraderie on air. And unfortunately, a few years later, Bob passed away, and Les and I continued on with the radio show and renamed it Cruise Control, and really tried to focus it on both the car culture. So it can be people like we had Peter Max on, who is a famous artist, and he has like 36 Corvettes, and he wants to turn them into an art project. You wouldn't think he's a car guy, but here he is, the famous Peter Max artist from the 60s and 70s. We had Billy Gibbons on, who is obviously a ZZ Top guy, and wrote a book about cars and is a hardcore car owner. But we've had all kinds of people on. Mario Andretti. We have the other people we get on that are kind of in the car industry that I'd like to bring on are designers and engineers. And talking about Corvettes at Carlisle, every year at Corvettes at Carlisle, we do a 2-hour show, and we bring everyone in, including the chief engineer and the designer, and, we really go into that type of thing. And then when we don't have guests on, we talk about new cars we drive. Between the two of us, we probably drive 100 new cars a year. Mm-hmm. And we also talk about technology, the new technology coming out. You mentioned at the beginning of this interview about diesel technology and electronic technology, infotainment, all that. And what's going on in the auto industry? I mean, it was a tumultuous time when we thought we might lose both Chrysler and GM. I mean, big chunks of history there, So, and we also have fun with trivia. We have a feature called Forgotten Cars, and you wouldn't believe how many models are forgotten and they maybe were made like 5 years ago, and you just can't recall it at all. So,
yeah, especially without seeing them.
That's right.
That's interesting. Well, for people that are listening to Shop Talk, and by the way, we're talking with Fred Staab with Cruise Control Radio, among other things. How would people that are listening to Shop Talk now, how would they find the radio show?
Well, that's the fun thing about it. I mean, we're on 60 markets around the country, broadcast what they would call terrestrial radio, so they can always listen there. But we're also on a lot of great new apps like Stitcher and AHA Radio and TuneIn Radio. So that's a whole other market for us. People can listen to us on the web. There's a stream also at cruisecontrolradio.com. You follow the links so they can go on there. We're on at 10 a.m. Eastern Time Saturdays to 12 noon. And then if they can't get any of those or they don't have time for that, we were the first automotive show to start podcasting way back in 2005 when I looked on something called iTunes for the first time, and I said, hey, what's this podcast stuff about? You know, there's no automotive show, and I started podcasting that, and that gives us basically an international audience. We'll get people, entering contests from like Ireland and Australia and all that type of thing.
Yeah, you got to love the internet technology.
It really changed radio. It really has. It really has. And, the mixture of all those things brings in a very unique audience. Maybe the older guys listen on an AM radio station, and the younger guys will listen on TuneIn Radio or something like that. So a lot of fun.
Well, and it allows guys like you and me to talk and other people to kind of listen in vicariously and find out what makes you tick and other experience that you've had. So, people listening, Cruise Control Radio, it's a good listen, and there's always something new, always something interesting. And if you're interested in especially what's coming up in new technology, I strongly suggest that you head over that way. But now, Fred, you're also an editor, and you and I have that in common as well.
That's
because,
right.
With my TV background and the paint education instructional videos, I edit my own pieces. I don't edit the TV shows, but I certainly have a hand in a lot of that production. So you and I share that in common as well, and probably a lot of other people that are relatively PC savvy have messed around with Windows Movie Maker and just smaller editing programs. Heck, you can edit on your smartphone now.
That's right.
So it's something that a lot of people can relate to. So give us a little bit of background in how you got into that vocation and what you kind of do, if you can drop some names.
Sure, I can drop some names. Yeah, I got into the TV industry. I was working in college radio, and one of the advisors worked for ABC, and this guy is like an audio guru. He would just... They give him a whole bunch of audio gear, big boards, Neve boards and all that, and say, go off and build a audio control room, and they lock the door shut. And then he'd build it on, and he'd come out 2 weeks later with a full...
Looking like Howard Hughes.
Yeah, with a full studio set up, ready to go. And, he told me a little bit about what he did, and I took a tour, and I thought, this is something I want to do. And then the real motivator came in. Someone said, oh, yeah, TV industry, unless, your dad is in it or, you know somebody in it, forget it. You'll never have a chance of getting into it. And that's always been a motivator when someone says, no, you can't do that. You'll never be able to do that. So I got into it, and I worked at a place out on Long Island, which was in a old mansion that was built for the DuPonts, so that was kind of fun. Walked in and volunteered and then kind of worked my way up. I worked at a lot of different places. I worked at A Current Affair, if you remember that tabloid show.
I remember that show, absolutely.
It was a lot of fun. There I produced a story on a drag racer, Darryl Gwynn, who, it was always kind of an ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. That's what they used to call that show. He was a racer that was promoting the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis, just to raise awareness of spinal cord injuries. Well, the poor guy goes and gets into a crash in England and becomes paralyzed himself. Now they have to help him. The people he was helping, now they have to help him medically. And I became good friends with him. And actually,
well, he brings attention to those issues worldwide and is a great advocate for fundraising and things like that.
Sure.
So he has done amazing things on behalf of people with spinal cord injuries and things like that. So, I admire him so for that.
Sure. So that was just one story I did while I was there. And then I worked at ABC, and then in both editing and management. And I worked at NBC on Dateline, and now currently on the Today Show. And I like it. You know, there's crossovers. You'll find a gearhead or two every once in a while, but not so much in New York City. But you know, it is fun. I got to work with Billy Gibbons again. We needed a piece about you know, convertibles coming back. This was a number of years ago, and he was down in Nashville recording, and they said, "Well, can you do it down here?" And they sent a crew down, and he did his shtick, and it was kind of a fun piece too, you know. So there are a few gearheads in New York, though. I tell you, one of my colleagues, I was telling one of my colleagues about the show I do and that, and she said, "Oh, my husband's into this," and she pulled out her phone and said, "Here's what I saw when I came back to my apartment in New York City," and she showed me a picture of this little New York City apartment kitchen, like a not a studio kitchen, but you know, that's just sort of like a countertop basically. And there were some 22-inch wheels with rubber sitting there for him. And she's like, "Yeah, he's got a 64 Continental with suicide doors that he keeps in Queens, and he got these I guess Tire Rack sent these wheels in, so that's what I came back to." And she said, "He's going to have to buy me some Louboutin shoes to make up for this."
There you go. Well, it's good to know that you're surrounded by at least a few people that share the same DNA as you and I. So
most cars in New York, people say they're either yellow with a light on top or they're black. You know, they're just a limousine to take you somewhere. But that's what most people's understanding.
Well, personally, I love New York. I love Manhattan. My wife and I go up there and just to see shows and just hang there in the vibe. And it's a great city to be in. And but I do understand the need for public transportation and limited personal transportation. So it just kind of goes hand in hand. But you know, in rural Tennessee where we are, we all have our own car, and that's how we get to work.
Sure.
We just don't jump on the subway.
I like that. You don't have anyone sweating up against you.
No. Well,
on the subway.
Unless the air conditioner is broken, your car.
That's right.
Yeah. But we talked about diesels before, and of course you with the old two-stroke diesels that you grew up around. I love diesel trucks. They're the quintessential towing vehicle. I actually spent some time behind the wheel of it was a white Road Boss back in the 80s, and you know, you learn a whole new perspective for driving and road respect.
What did that have in it for power? Do you remember?
About 8 long-haired dudes playing rock and roll.
No, I meant the engine.
Oh, the engine. Okay. No, it was a Cummins engine. I believe it was a 350, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
It had, I think it was 11-speed transmission with a split axle, of course.
Split rear, yeah. Those guys are good. Yeah. When you hear them shift, it's like one gear for every 2 feet, you know, and then they split the rear, and it's pretty crazy the way they do it.
Well, funny story. When I was getting used to the truck, of course, the manager and the other guy that drove the truck, they were really, really good drivers and had mastered that split rear. And the sleeper was behind the cab for all the rock and roll knuckleheads that were traveling with us. So if I didn't give them a smooth ride, everybody was mad at me and grumpy. So I learned how to drive very effectively, very quickly. So it was a cool perspective. But you know, diesel makes this country tick. And I think it's about time the OEs got off their butts and got some clean diesel technology in not only passenger cars, but small pickup trucks and some even some compact cars. What's your thought on that?
Oh, yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, a lot of my fellow automotive journalists have been saying this for years because we know what's out there in Europe and we know the mileage you can get. And we've always wondered why. And I've had talked to a lot of marketing people in the auto manufacturers and the product people, and they're like, "You guys, I know you're all into it, but we're worried. You know, will people buy it?" And you know, I think it comes from they're just worried about the disaster that GM had many years ago with the Oldsmobile diesel. And it's like let's do an experiment. Let's take a gas 350 engine and bump the compression ratio up to 22-1, and let's see what happens to the head gaskets. How fast
they'll come out the fenders.
Yeah, but I think that left a bad stain in people's mouths, and even some of the old Mercedes, where you would see them go by and they'd have the patch of soot around the exhaust pipe, you know.
Well, and on that note, working in body shops for so long, when one of those suckers would come into the parking lot for collision repair, we would shudder at the thought because, of course, all that contamination got mixed in with the paint,
That's
and
right.
you get fish eyes and all that kind of stuff. So, but it's not like that anymore, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, I remember, it was just sure a while ago, I remember driving, having as a press car a VW Golf, which was back still when they had the mechanical injection, probably, well, maybe it is 8-9 years ago, and you would smell a little diesel smell, but not bad. And then I had a newer one not that long ago, and you fire it up in the garage, you don't smell anything. It doesn't. You wouldn't really know it's a diesel.
You wouldn't know at all. And for the Search and Restore show, we got a brand spanking new 2013 F350
Wow.
Super Duty.
That's a nice piece.
Oh, gosh, it was a beautiful truck. Air-conditioned seats, and there's a whole other story about that. The first time anyway, we won't go there today.
Odd turn. That's taken an odd turn all of a sudden.
I'm sorry, but it surprised me. We were talking about exhaust, and it sort of reminded me of that. Anyway, but it's got the urea injection,
Sure.
and we had that thing running in the studio, in the truck set, and not only could you not smell it, but to this day, it's been almost 2 years in production in hauling vehicles around, and light use, not compared to maybe somebody that hauls a horse trailer around. There is no soot on the inside of the exhaust pipe. That, to me, is very telling. And, I happen to like the smell of diesel fuel because it conjures up images of rock and roll tour buses, but...
Right.
But at the same time, people aren't experiencing that anymore. But I think the American public is slow to catch on to that. I think we still see diesel as dirty, and it's just not anymore.
Yeah, it's not. And, I think what you're going to see, there's kind of it's been brewing for a while, and I think the floodgates are going to open, and you're going to see diesel cars in the U.S., a lot more of them, for a number of reasons. First off, light trucks have to meet the mile per gallon spec. And
yes, they do.
You need a full frame on the truck. You need it just weighs a certain amount. A pickup truck, that's what it weighs. And of course those are the most popular vehicles still sales wise in the U.S. So you need to raise that up without reducing the capability of the truck. Also the numbers keep going up, and you need to make big gains, and you can make big gains with diesel. I mean, they do the corporate average fuel economy. If you have several small cars, and they're getting, 50, 60 miles per gallon, and you factor that in, and you say, well, I want to build a big gas-powered V8 supercar on one end, and then I want to, but I want to be able to meet that CAFE number. If you can mix some of these smaller diesels in that are getting 50, 60 miles to the gallon, that's going to all average out.
Exactly. It brings your averages up. So it doesn't have to be that every vehicle gets 54 miles per gallon. It just has to be that the average is. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, and my co-host on the show, Ryan Shand, who you've met, and Ryan's a great guy, and he's an excellent mechanic. And he bought a Volkswagen Jetta for him and his family, and they commute back and forth to where he's from, up in the Northeast, and he gets not only 600 miles to a tank of fuel, but he's pushing 50 miles per gallon in a mid-sized car. That's a nicely styled car. It's got plenty of cool options, and despite the fact that he's a mechanic and he could fix it if it broke, it's going to last forever. It's just not going to break. So, it's there in foreign cars, and I'm clicking my fingertips on the desktop, waiting for the big three to come into the. You know what I'm saying?
Well, let's talk about this. I think it will happen. Another reason, I was just over in Europe. I was in Spain, and we had what they call a Mercedes Vito van, and this is sort of like a minivan on steroids. It can hold 9 passengers. It's smaller than a Sprinter van, but it's much bigger than a Dodge Caravan, let's say, right? So we had 9 passengers in there and loaded to the roof with luggage, going from Madrid to a place called Malaga. And yes, I'm told that's the way it's said, so the right pronunciation. Over hills. It reminded me of the trips I used to take in the RV when I was a kid, right? And we still managed to get 32 miles to the gallon.
Yeah, loaded to the gills.
Yeah, and a big vehicle. I mean, that's probably bigger than a pickup truck, I would imagine. I don't know what the weight was on. I forgot to look, but there you go. That's great. Where we still have people running around in minivans, going to soccer matches that are getting, 13, 14, 15 miles to the gallon. So
yeah, depending on tire pressure and tune, absolutely. It's just they're not efficient.
That's right. So you're going to see the floodgates open. Another reason is they used to say, well, we've got these great cars in Europe, but, if we bring them over to the U.S., we're going to have to put $3,000 or $4,000 worth of gear on it to make it meet the spec, right, to make it meet the EPA spec, which is Tier 2 Bin 5, which sounds like a filing cabinet, actually, but that's what it is. Now there's this Euro Spec 6 that's going to be similar to the U.S. spec, and that means if they're building it in Europe and it meets the U.S. spec or is very close and just needs a little tweak and calibration, you're going to see a lot more cars coming over. And already we know, VW, just about every vehicle in their lineup is going to have a diesel in it. I'm pushing for, let's say, the Tiguan, which is their small crossover. Mm-hmm. That's what I would like. Vehicles like that. They're small.
Well, and as I learned today, the Mazda 3, there's plans for a diesel platform in that as well. In a 2.2 liter diesel is right.
Not confirmed, but looking good because they have the diesel in the Mazda 6, which is a bigger vehicle.
So what you're saying is it's coming.
It's coming. I mean, Chevy has their Cruise diesel coming in, and once that engine gets in, and these cars are all kind of based on the same architecture, so that it will fit. I drove the off-road. I drove the Grand Cherokee with the 3-liter diesel, and it is amazing. What a perfect engine. It was like we were climbing rocks, and the thing's just kind of idling along with all that torque, low-end torque.
And that's OE stuff. That's stuff that's coming from the factories that are going to be really fun cars. Now, let's move over to the hot rodder perspective for a second. Mm-hmm. Let's go to for perhaps a 70 Chevelle with a Duramax diesel that's pushing 1,000 horsepower and 1,400 foot-pounds of torque. That car was on the floor at SEMA 2 years ago. So, hot rodder guys, they see those kind of numbers, and with arguably about the same fuel economy as my little Mazda 3, that makes hot rodder sense.
Sure does. And have you ever heard of, I'm asking the trucks guy about this, but I've heard some performance exhaust systems on diesel trucks, and they sound pretty wild.
They do sound good, and you can really change the resonance. I've talked to a lot of the engineers in these exhaust companies. It's a kind of a really fun thing that I get to do with my job on the TV shows. So we get to bend their ear, and they understand, as well as efficiency, as well as, longevity, durability in the exhaust system, it's as important, if not more important, that we have a not only an improved sound, but a sound that really makes us feel good. They do a lot of R&D and a lot of science on making these exhaust systems work. And, you and I have talked before about small displacement engines and making them sound better, and they don't sound like a V8. And, that's one of the things that Donald Farr said when I talked to him. Is, if the new Shelby in 5 years is a V6 turbocharged car, which who knows, it may be, I hope they make it sound like a V8.
Sure.
But I don't know. I think there's a chance that they can sound wicked and mean and cool and still have their own identity, because nothing sounds like a big block. I don't want my inline 4 to sound like a big block.
Well,
I don't know.
I
want to see the difference.
That's all psychoacoustics. I mean, I think there are things, and you being a musician, I think there's similarities to the way a car sounds and a guitar sounds. Music is like stair steps, up and down. That's what a car is like. You're going up through the gears, you're going down through. I think that's where the tie-in comes in. I don't know. Maybe I'm not an expert here, but it's climbing and going upstairs and going downstairs. Music and cars, and that's kind of what I think it is. And certain sounds just get to you. When a guy plays a guitar, it's a certain sound with some distortion or whatever, you like it. Maybe if you play it a different way, they don't like it. So it's the way it is for cars too.
Well, and for engines, I know if you've ever stood beside a Duramax diesel engine in a Chevy pickup truck running, you don't even hear it.
Right.
You think maybe there's a little bit of top-end noise, but it doesn't sound like a traditional old diesel engine sounds. So, they can tweak that technology and exhaust technology. What I'm saying, my big point, is that it's okay that this technology is coming down the pike. And I think it's good news for us gearhead hot rodder guys.
Well, even in my TV background, I've been doing TV probably over 25 years. I always was the guy that liked the technology, you know, and when nonlinear editing came out, people were like, oh, this will never work. It's like you can't fight technology. You got to learn how to work with it and embrace it because it's not going to stop. You can stop, but the technology won't.
Exactly. And, you know, I remember when, you know, the EEPROM chips were the big rage and everybody was chipping their car.
Right.
And you chip your Corvette, and it was this voodoo technology, and you stick this thing in there and you hope it works. And that was the end of hot rodding as we know it.
Right.
You could read the articles in the magazines, and we're never going to be able to get past the computers. And guess what happened, my friend? Everybody got past the computers, and this new breed of hot rodders that were technologically driven on computers are cracking codes, and they're getting in there. And there's a guy up in Michigan that's getting 600 horsepower at the wheels from a stock EcoBoost V6.
Wow.
That's coming down the pike, you know, and so whatever they put in front, it's like if somebody said you couldn't do it, it made you try harder to do it, and that's what's happening. So I am the eternal optimist. My cup is half full. I see the silver lining rather than the thundercloud. Well, whatever you want to say about it, I think there's good news coming.
Absolutely, and Kevin, one of the big things we deal with on Cruise Control Radio is the folks, the millennials. Somehow, I don't understand this. And I don't want to paint with a big brush, so millennials listening to this, don't hate me. But I've encountered a lot of people, even at car events. I was at a car event with Bill Ford, and it was all younger folks. It was like the Ford was sponsoring this kind of green film, you know, about green or series or something like that. And they were all telling me, the young folks, how they hated cars and they were always going to live in a city. And I tried to be the old guy saying, well, you never know what's going to happen in life. You might get a job like the old man on the hill telling them, these kids. I say, you never know. I mean, you never know what's going to come down the line. But the long roundabout to that is there's got to be hot rodders out there, and hot rodding to them has meant overclocking a computer or rooting their smartphone to make it run faster, you know?
Yeah, or ripping a DVD to get the footage or something.
So, you know, tweaking on a car with a computer, you know, is probably, that would appeal. And it sort of goes along with games, too, you know, with computer games. There's always, they're tweaking it. And I think that's, and you know, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think that's great. You know, no,
it's just it's another version of people wanting to tear stuff apart and make it better.
It's better, and it's more fun than trying to jet your carburetor and say, did I go the right way? Oh, no, it's too lean. Oh, you know.
Yep. You know, one of the things that was cool for me on trucks is one of the first projects that we did on the truck show was a mini truck. It was a little Nissan hardbody, and we slammed it. We took pages directly out of the Mini Trucker catalog, and that had never been done before in the truck show. And I'm friends with Stacy David, and you know, we talk every once in a while. We certainly bump into each other at trade shows, but I always wondered why he never did a mini truck. And not to second guess him or criticize, please don't misunderstand, but I liked him. And what was really cool about the mini truck was that it brought these kids that were basically doing a mirror image of what the guys coming back from the armed forces and the services in the 50s were doing. They're taking inexpensive vehicles and making them faster, putting their own spin on them, putting their own style on them. It's hot rodding.
Right.
And you know what else happens is these guys in the mini trucks or the Game Boys or the PlayStations, eventually they're going to graduate to different vehicles.
Sure.
And, you know, and the other thing, too, is that the United States and Canada and Mexico and even Central America, we're rural here. We're not jammed, packed together. So as long as it's a rural country, there's going to be personal transportation, right? As long as there's personal transportation, we have to... as Americans, I guess it's our duty on some level to make it our own, to personalize it. So I have big faith that with all this technology, it's going to end well. We're going to land on our feet, and we're going to have years and years and years of hot rodding, whether it's with clean diesel or who knows, small displacement, high compression.
Well, look at like the Subaru BRZ and the Scion component, which I forget the name at the moment because it's just a bunch of numbers and letters, and small rear drive, 4-cylinder turbo engine, lots of parts out there, really sporty. You can get into those cars, I think, for about, I don't know, 22, 25 grand, which is cheap nowadays for cars. The average transaction price is probably going towards 35,000. And look, there's some talk, obviously, that's, you know, Mark Royce from GM has talked about this. He wants to do something like that, a rear drive front engine car with a 4-cylinder. There was some talk they might even call it the Chevelle, but nothing's clear. But he's really into that. Mark Royce is a performance guy. I mean, to me, that would have been a ideal first car. That would be ideal first car. Manual transmission, rear drive, lots of parts available, lots of tweaks for the engine.
Mm-hmm. Room to grow with it, and when they wear out and break down, well, then you can throw a different engine in it, and here we go again.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Very cool. So, again, we're listening to Shop Talk, and we're speaking with Fred Staab from Cruise Control Radio, among other things. He's a Renaissance man and somebody that I'm jealous of the amount of cars that you get to drive, and we talk every once in a while, and I just drove at this. Or
I just feel lucky to do it. I love cars, and I'm glad I get to try them. I'm very lucky.
Well, very good. Well, tell people again how to get access to Cruise Control.
Sure. Cruise Control airs live 10 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern Time on Saturdays. It's also rebroadcast throughout the week. You can find out how to hear us live on one of the many outlets we have, or you can find out how to hear us on things like Stitcher or AHA Radio or iTunes for the podcast. Or the live stream. Best place to go, cruisecontrolradio.com. That's cruisecontrolradio.com. It's all there on the homepage, and you can click around and find out about that. And
you have other shows archived too, don't you?
Oh, I have tons of shows archived. Yeah, tons of shows archived, and it's great. People will download shows that might be a year old, but they still like it. They see something, a review they like, or whatever. So, that's, like I say, the technology's changed the show. It's really great to use that. And I'm sure you see that with your podcast. It's great. People can listen to it anytime.
Yeah, it's a privilege being able to do this. So, I met Fred at the SEMA show, and we were at the big banquet that happens on Thursday night, kind of winds everything up, and you and Les came up to me, and we just started talking, and you said, hey, I've got this radio show. Do you think you'd be interested in being a guest sometime? And that conversation, I'd never met you before, but from that moment on, it felt like I'd known you for 20 years.
Oh, well, thank you.
No, I wanted to say thanks out loud, Fred, and for being such a good friend and a guy to bend the ear of, and it's just been a pleasure knowing you, and I wanted to thank you again for being a part of Shop Talk and sharing with us kind of your perspective on things.
Well, not to turn this into the Mutual Admiration Society here, but I have to say, and I know you get kind of embarrassed when I say this, I have learned so much from you watching your show over the years, Trucks, and through knowing you, but just about how to handle issues with your car or customizing it, and just watching it. I think you guys do a great job, because it's not like slapstick, it's real. It's like, here's how you box a frame. Okay, so let's follow it. It's real stuff, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for saying that, and that I'm humbled by that. And Ryan and I always say we make the shows that we would want to watch. So it's nice to know that resonates as well. So Fred, thank you so much for sharing time with us. We really appreciate it here, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. And maybe when we get some kind of crazy clean high performance diesel car, we can talk again.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Kevin.
Absolutely. Well, Fred Staab from Cruise Control Radio, cruisecontrolradio.com. Thanks for being a part of our show. This is Shop Talk, brought to you by the Eastwood Company, makers of fine automotive tools and equipment. Do the job right with Eastwood. Well, there you have it. And if you find yourself sitting in front of the television for the morning Today show on NBC, well, now you know somebody that's behind the scenes. And you can have faith, just like I do, that somebody up there pushing buttons is really wishing that they were laying some rubber somewhere down a side road. So thanks for listening to Shop Talk. We'll see you down the road. In the meantime, check out everything at the Eastwood.com website. Eastwood has what it takes to do the job right. And you know me, I like to do the job right. Thanks for listening to Shop Talk. I'm Kevin Tetz.